Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for being here, and welcome to today's webinar. I am Kelsey Card, Communications Manager with America Walks. I'll be your facilitator today, and I'll also be running the technical stuff behind the scenes. And before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsors, including the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, for making these great events possible for us. And along with our sponsors, we also want to thank all of you who attend and have donated to make sure this webinar program and our other programs continue to thrive. And these are programs that allow us to really directly support local grassroots activism at the neighborhood level. So if you like this content and you're a regular guest here, we really encourage you to just think about making a donation towards our webinars, and there will be a link in the chat here shortly to do that. And a quick note about the technology. You should see a control panel just like this on your screen. That's where I'll be looking for your questions for our panelists. So after our presentations, we'll kick off the Q&A session. So enter any questions that you have right there. And if you'd like to use our closed captioning today, there is a link in the chat box for you. So our presenters today are Tokes Omishakin, Director of the California Department of Transportation, or Caltrans; Beth Osborne, Director of Transportation for America; Patrick Ryoen, Director of Government Relations at Rails to Trails Conservancy; and our Q&A moderator is Paulina Baeza, Senior Planner for NCOG, Tulsa's Metropolitan Planning Organization. So today's webinar is focused on what the current administration with President Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg as USDOT leader means for all of our various channels of active transportation work when it comes to creating and advocating for safe, connected, people-first communities. So this administration has created some buzz around the potential for a shift in US transportation policy. So between items like increased transit funding, removal of highways that divided Black communities, we all want to know how big a shift could this really be, and what's currently potentially in the works. So our panelists will share their specialized insights on the Biden administration and transportation policy, so their thoughts and predictions, and we'll also spend time answering your questions at the end. So thank you so much to everyone for being here. I'm going to quickly turn things over to Tokes now, and we will go ahead and get started. Tokes, we can't quite hear you yet. Still not hearing you.
There we go. I think I may have finally unmuted the last.
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks so much.
Good. Good morning, and thanks for the quick intro, and thank you for the work that you are doing for America Walks, and to the team for America Walks, Mike, the entire team there, for organizing this esteemed panel to get together this morning. As I share my remarks here, and a lot of excitement, like a lot of people have right now, about finally the direction that we're headed in across the country, and definitely for sure in the state of California, there's a lot of excitement. I just want to briefly say that my remarks here this morning, the points that I'll be making are coming from me as I sit in this role at Caltrans at the California DOT, and not in any way speaking for formally for the administration or the transition team. I think some people may know I was fortunate enough to be a part of the transition team, the transportation transition team, and so we signed all non-disclosures, and I'm not in any official capacity talking about that work. But let me say, just quickly that I think part of the excitement is because there is a clear feeling and belief that we have a lot of momentum behind us. It's a momentous period, but it's also a pivotal period as well. I think a lot of people are recognizing that even though a lot of the right things are being said and things are being done, we've got to keep our eye on the ball, if you will, and keep pushing the country forward. It is not time. It is not a time to relax on the issues that we believe are important for transportation and livability across the board. And I'll say there are what I call the big five in transportation that California is focused on, and I think the nation should be focused on as well, and hopefully, and I think they are. I think that the new team that's been assembled, Secretary Buttigieg and the team, Polly Trottenberg, the entire team that's been put there to lead us right now across the nation, I think they're focused on these issues. But the big five in my mind are number one, safety. That's a big and significant issue. We still have roughly 36,000 people dying on our transportation system across the country every year. In California, it's 3,600. So we're 10% of the nation's, roughly 10% of the nation's fatalities when it comes to the transportation network. And the vulnerable users of the system are the ones that have seen an uptick in fatality numbers and serious injury numbers. It's coming from the vulnerable users, people who are walking, people who are biking, and trying to get access to transit. So safety absolutely key, and it's probably number one on the big five list. Number two is climate action. I think everyone knows that transportation continues to lead the way when you talk about impacts of GHG across the country. Nearly a third of all GHG in the country comes from the transportation sector, roughly 30%. In California, it's actually worse. In California, that number is a little over 40% of the GHG in California comes from the transportation sector. So climate action is decisions are and action is needed now. And I think, again, the new team has said that this will be a focus of theirs. And then next is equity. Number three on that big five list is equity. The fact that we finally, I believe, are taking serious the discussions around equity across this country. The reckoning that's taken place on issues of injustice. I think we've been, in many cases across the country for the several last years, have been given lip service to this issue. But I think this summer, after the unrest post the George Floyd, the unfortunate killing of George Floyd, I think we're finally saying, look, what are we going to do in our organizations? What are we going to do in our separate departments and sectors? And transportation, no doubt, has a difficult and in some cases negative history and some of the impacts that it's had on minority communities and underserved communities in this country. So I think we're finally at that point where a lot of equity-based policy decisions are going to come out. And you could tell by some of the decisions that the president has made already. And the last two are mobility access, mobility or access, the fact that from a mobility standpoint, we need to continue to shift into a place where we're maintaining and operating the transportation system better, and not necessarily focused on expanding that transportation network with new highway infrastructure. So not really, spending a lot of federal dollars on widening highways across the country or building giant freeways across the country, but focusing on maintaining the system, a fix-it-first approach, fully embracing and adapting that approach is where we need to, and improving mobility and access in all modes: walking, biking, bus transit, rail. Investing in a full multimodal transportation system is a place that we need to truly try to get to. And fifth and final on that list of the big five is funding and economic empowerment. And when I say economic empowerment, I think people across the country already know that investing in transportation means jobs as well. It's not just about the mobility, but the fact that jobs are created. For every $1 billion spent in transportation, we create 14,000 jobs for every $1 billion. So there's a lot of economic upward mobility that's created when you invest in transportation. And then the funding piece of that economic empowerment is the fact that we need to figure out how we're going to fund transportation moving forward in the future. We still borrow roughly 12 to 14 billion dollars every year from non-transportation related funds to pay for transportation, which doesn't make a lot of sense. We need to solidify the highway trust fund and think about the future of how we fund transportation, possibly moving away from a gas tax to some other form of funding, maybe VMT or some other source of funding for transportation. So those are the big five that I would say that for sure we're thinking about quite a bit in California. And I know the administration, the Biden administration and Secretary Buttigieg's team is probably heavily focused on as well. And next, I think I'm supposed to be handing the baton across here. I want to hand the baton to my old colleague and friend, Beth Osborne. Beth, are you there?
I surely am. I am here. Show my screen. Smooth. Okay. Let me do this. All right. Well, first off, I just have to say how lucky California is to have Tokes leading Caltrans. It's not only great to hear the message he is sending and the important goals that California is setting for their transportation system, but also to see that great message coupled with great action. We're seeing rules and standards and measurements change in California, and that's what we're looking for with the feds as well. So far, we're hearing a lot of great terminology. Now we need to see action follow that. And I think that's something we've heard from America Walks, that we've gotten ourselves this far, but the network now needs to make sure that we hold the new leadership accountable for the action. So before I get to what that action could look like, I would like to back up and remind us of where we are. So my organization, Smart Growth America, which is the parent organization for Transportation for America, and I actually manage the National Complete Streets Coalition as well, has been measuring the role roadway design plays in pedestrian fatalities for more than a decade now. And we have shown that while the overall transportation system is getting safer for drivers, it is getting less safe for our most vulnerable users. Those who are outside of a vehicle, those who are too young to drive, those who might need mobility assistance, and those who don't have the money to drive, which is a group overrepresented by people of color. Now I'm going to give you a little sneak peek here. In about 2 weeks, you're going to see the new Dangerous by Design. And the basic news is that it's just as bad as it's been. There was really no change. I will point out that we're looking at 2010 to 2019 because there's a lot of data scrubbing and fixing that occurs before we get to see the 2020 data. But basically, we see a lot of states, most states are having trouble meeting their own targets for reducing fatalities, and that they are even struggling to figure out best how to make that happen when they do set those standards. So, okay. We also found in 2020 that at least in the first 6 months of the year, we saw an increased fatality rate for overall, but definitely hitting pedestrians, no pun intended. And a lot of that is because the design of our roadways tells the driver to go so fast that quite often, without traffic congestion there to slow them down, they just follow the design. And so they were going at very high rates of speed. Often that design tells them to go faster than the posted speed. The speed we decided is the safe speed. The fact that our posted speed and the design of the roadway aren't synced up is a serious problem, and it's fully within the control of state DOTs and federal USDOT to address. And the deal is you really prioritize both safety and speed at the same time. The way you prioritize safety and speed is you don't have the speed by development or people. That's why on the interstates and separated highways, you can have a high rate of speed. But once you bring that design to the level of where the people are, whether in urban, suburban, exurban, or rural towns, it doesn't work. To see the full scope of the road, the faster they go, doesn't give them a chance to react if there's a potential point of conflict, and a crash is more deadly. This is the roadways we tend to get as we prioritize throughput and high-speed car travel. You see the lonely person in the upper left-hand corner. Providing that poor person with a way to cross would slow down traffic. And in fact, if he were to walk off into traffic and get hit, he would be blamed for jaywalking. But if a bunch of people don't do that, our rules don't permit us to establish a crossing. So basically, the way our rules flow right now, we need a bunch of people to take the chance of sacrificing themselves to make the case for a crossing. Now, my organization has set 3 priorities for the transportation system, including reauthorization. That is to prioritize maintenance, which you heard Tokes talk about, prioritizing safety over speed, which we've both talked about, and connecting people to jobs and services using performance measures that looks not at vehicle flow, but whether or not you actually arrive at your destination, using what I would call recent technology, but frankly, some of it is not very recent anymore, like GIS is 20 years old. So really just applying the technology we're using throughout our lives, transportation. So what can we ask of this administration? Well, first is executive actions, looking at the manuals and standards they apply to states and localities that use federal dollars. One is called the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the MUTCD. There's a new edition that is before the public now, and the Federal Highway Administration is accepting comments. I would argue that they should rescind and redraft this current edition, because it makes a lot of the things we're seeking, such as easier crossings for pedestrians, slower speeds on the roadway, slower speed limits on the roadways, and things like that, hard process that require a lot of exceptions to the rule. The Green Book, which is the design guide for our highways, does the same thing. It permits us to build a community that is walkable. It just makes it really hard to do it because you have to ask for permission over and over to get out of highway standards. What we're looking for is, particularly in developed areas, whether rural or urban, where the people are, where the businesses are, you flip that on its head. You make it easy to build a community that is safe for those who are moving around both inside in a car where that's likely to happen. And you can have highway standards for separated highways. There's also a lot of performance and projections that lead us in the wrong way. We could require the DOTs to check the accuracy of their models. A lot of times, the reason they can't allow a crossing is their models tell them that there will always be more traffic, there will always be more drivers, really no matter what. And so it looks like when you make more space for the pedestrian that you're going to create a huge bottleneck, even though our design can shift the way people travel. I'm just going to jump down to the last two. We can set climate as one of the standards we care about, and we could ask the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to stop victim blaming. Stop blaming the people who get hit and ask them to be more visible when we have a roadway design system that hides people from those driving. When we have automobile, particularly SUV design, that makes people very hard for drivers to see. We should make it hard for drivers to see people or know where they're coming from. We should have a design that makes that clear and obvious, and we should make it easy for people to get around. And the last thing I'll point out is all the legislative actions coming up. We should be looking to embed climate equity, safety, public health, and economic recovery in all of our transportation investments, which goes back to the priorities I shared. A fix-it-first model not only prevents more sprawl-inducing and traffic-inducing expansions of highways, but it also makes sure that where you live, the infrastructure is functional and in good condition. Measuring multimodal access, whether or not people actually get to jobs and essential services, whether they're in a car or not. And another I will mention is transit funding parity. If we move to a world where we're funding transit at the same level as highways, we could provide most cities, even quite small cities down at about 100,000 people, access to pretty high quality transit, about the quality that you see in a city like Chicago. And then in stimulus, I just want to point out that I was very much a part of the last stimulus bill in 2009, where we created stimulus by just pouring money into our existing programs that are creating all the problems we're talking about: the lack of walkability, the lack of safety, the separation of communities from the things they need, particularly communities of color and most often Black communities. The VMT increasing, greenhouse gas increasing infrastructure. And that doesn't make any sense. We shouldn't just be creating jobs through construction. We should be creating jobs through construction that make our communities better. So rather than just dumping money into the existing programs, it would be good for this new administration to call for funds to go out for specific purposes that match their priorities, like climate and equity and economic recovery. I have provided a link here, and I'm happy to share it in the chat as well, our transition recommendations, which include a lot of these things. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Beth, and thank you, Tokes. We'll pass it on to Patrick now.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Kelsey. Thanks for putting this webinar together. And let me see, I'm going to show my screen here. I hope you can see that. Let me know if
Looks
you can.
great.
Great. All right, so first, let me tell you a little bit about who I am and what Rails to Trails Conservancy does, and then I'll talk about what our hopes are and plans are for the new administration and the new Congress that we have in place to really turbocharge our nation's investment in safe and connected infrastructure for walking and biking. Rails to Trails Conservancy is the nation's largest trails, walking, and biking organization. Our goal is to build a nation connected by trail. So we are working with communities around the country to build infrastructure for walking and biking that is both safe, and we see the safest infrastructure as infrastructure that is trail that is separated from the roadways, so that people can walk and bike safely, but also connected, that it gets the people to the places where they need to go on a daily basis. And this is me. In addition to serving as Director of Government Relations at Rails to Trails Conservancy, I serve as the Mayor of the City of College Park, Maryland. I want to talk a little bit about College Park because we are a suburban community that historically was built up in very much the way that Beth described, where we have infrastructure predominantly focused on accommodating cars and accommodating cars moving fast. Right now, we're a university community, as the name suggests, the home of the University of Maryland in College Park, and we are focused on smart growth around the university. So our goal really is to make it safe for people who live nearby the university, who live in our community, to be able to walk or bike safely to the university and building walking and biking infrastructure. So I've served in different leadership roles in the national level with the National League of Cities and the U.S. Conference of Mayors as we've been successful in transforming College Park into a walkable and bikeable community to position us as a model for other communities. But I'm going to talk, so in terms of where we see the Biden administration and what our opportunities are now, we are building now on a 30-year legacy of efforts to enhance opportunities for walking and biking that really was started with the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act of 1991, ICE-T, that funded for the first time the Transportation Enhancements Program, a program that has changed names over the years, is currently known as the Transportation Alternative Set Aside to the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, but most people know it as Transportation Alternatives, and also the Recreational Trails Program. Programs that really for these 3 decades have been the bread and butter of infrastructure for walking and biking and had a lot of good impacts around the country. And in the past 30 years, these are the 13 people that have served as secretaries of transportation during that time, either on an acting basis or fully have their appointment fully approved by Congress, by the Senate. And the way that the transportation alternatives and recreational trails programs have been implemented have really varied greatly throughout those 30 years in terms of their focus, in terms of how quickly they've gotten the resources out on the ground to enable people, enable communities to build that infrastructure. And we're very optimistic and excited about what we might be able to see with our new Secretary of Transportation, former South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg. This was recently, I had an opportunity to participate with a panel of mayors from around the country and to pose a question to Mayor Buttigieg about walking and biking, about what he did in South Bend and his lessons learned and opportunities that he sees to work with the Department of Transportation to increase the amount of investment and the ability of local communities to enable them more strongly to be able to build out active transportation infrastructure. And this is what he said in response, which there are a few important pieces to this which show what opportunities we have with the new administration. One is that he seemed open to the idea of really looking at how the Department of Transportation works with local communities to support building infrastructure for walking and biking, and even the structure of the Department of Transportation to show that that walking and biking should be a priority, is a mode of transportation along with roads and highways, along with transit, and that he sees that walking and biking should be given a priority place within the department. He talks about his trip when he was mayor of South Bend, together with former Secretary of Transportation Anthony Fox under the Obama administration, and that he saw that what was happening in places like Copenhagen and Amsterdam, and we all know about Copenhagen and Amsterdam, about how they really enhanced their infrastructure for walking and biking. But what struck him is that that at one point cities like Copenhagen and Amsterdam were no more friendly to walking and biking than American cities were. And that what it really took for them to do was a conscious choice, a conscious effort with real investment and real prioritization of walking and biking, and a lot of pain, a lot of lessons, a lot of effort to really get to where they are now. And he understands that what we need to do in the United States similarly is to really focus our resources, focus our effort, and prioritize walking and biking. He also pointed out, as many of us I'm sure have heard, the idea that there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing, but that places like Copenhagen are not known for great weather, but that even despite that, they can get people out walking and biking safely. So in terms of what needs to happen to get that support from the federal government to the local level, he talked about resources, he talked about dollars, he talked about moral support, and is looking for ways to build his team in the Department of Transportation that will support that for communities. So what we're hoping is that this will turn active transportation from a trend into a torrent. And a lot of you have known in your own communities about the different opportunities that exist, things like the Atlanta Beltline, as we see here, the Indianapolis Cultural Trail, the Midtown Greenway in Minneapolis, all the different things that we have been working on around the country to build trails to connect people by walking and biking. And we all know the benefits that this can have, the economic benefits that it can have. Well, and a lot of this ties very, very much into the priorities of the administration with their goals of addressing climate, their goals of making communities safer for people to walk and bike, their goals of boosting the economy, and what's become clear, especially over the last year during the coronavirus pandemic, as we've been dealing with that. Really, people have been turning to walking and biking as a way to get outside and get fresh air. So let me just talk briefly. Oh, and this is the non-motorized transportation pilot program, which came from Safety Lou in 2005, but really around 4 communities around the country, boosted funding for walking and biking and had significant benefits. We understand very well, because we've done this before, that we can get a lot of benefits out of boosting that investment. So this is, I'm going to go briefly over Rails to Trails agenda for active transportation in this next year. You can view the whole thing at that website on the bottom, railstotrails.org/trails transform. But and these are the different benefits that we can see. This is the group list of organizations that has supported our agenda, supports this effort. You can see a range of groups from groups that support accessibility for people with disabilities, smart growth organizations, of course, America Walks is on there, and groups like the National League of Cities that support local governments. So just briefly, and I can answer more questions about this during the Q&A. This is a list of our asks for the reauthorization of the FAST Act, as that's being debated in Congress this year. We are looking for Congress to dedicate $500 million per year over the course of 5 years, so $2.5 billion to support connectivity grants, we call them, basically direct grants that go to communities to support connected and safe active transportation infrastructure. Again, focusing on infrastructure that is safe, that presents a safe feelings that people are able to, willing to walk and bike on that infrastructure, and connected, and gets people to where they need to go. And supporting communities. We know communities around the country have plans in place about the infrastructure that they want to build, the networks that they want to build. So providing dedicated funds to enable them to do that. Transportation Alternatives has funded a lot of good projects over the years, but it's these significant grants. When Transportation Alternatives is spread thinly over many communities, it's difficult when a community has a network plan in place that would cost tens of millions of dollars a year to fund that through Transportation Alternatives. We do also want to increase Transportation Alternatives, double that from its current rate of $850 million per year to $1.7 billion per year, to fully fund the recreational trails program in line with the gas tax that is paid into the Highway Trust Fund by off-road recreation vehicles, which we estimate to be $250 million per year. Currently, that program is funded at $84 million per year. And then to really look at, as Mayor Buttigieg talked about, the structural way that the Department of Transportation is structured, to look at how that might be better structured to prioritize walking and biking, including potentially establishing an active transportation administration. In terms of some work that we want to do within the administration on policy and regulatory goals, we want to look at the planning process. Currently, many communities have been frustrated about how planning in metropolitan planning organizations and cities, while there are public engagement requirements for the transportation planning process, oftentimes they're perceived as a check the box exercise. And many communities don't, community organizations, many neighborhoods that are impacted by transportation decisions don't really feel like they have a place at the table. So we have a pilot program that we're working on to fund communities around the country to be an example of active partnerships between transportation planning agencies and community-based organizations, so that they really can feel like they have a place at the table. And then within the context of the work that, as Tokes mentioned before, the transportation is the leading cause right now, the single leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions, making sure that we look at mode shift to active transportation as a critical strategy in cutting carbon emissions. And then also looking at ways, the use of e-bikes, electric bicycles is exploding, and it's another tool to increase active transportation, looking at regulations that can support that. So this again is our website where you can find out more information about our policy priorities. And this is the Department of Transportation building that we're looking at making our way into it and making some change there. So thank you very much. And with that, I think I will turn it to Paulina to let's stop sharing to to moderate our question and answer session.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And thank you so much for having me. Definitely all of these topics, very interesting, very related to what we're living, to our time. And yes, we definitely have a lot of questions coming in. So regarding, I mean, everything that's going on right now with the pandemic, greater awareness of climate change, a deeper public understanding of racial equity concerns, and the hopefulness of a new administration. Are we looking at a transformational break with the past or just modest incremental change? And what are the opportunities all of you see in the future for transportation regarding each of your specific work? So I open this question to the entire panel.
Thanks. Paulina, can you hear me? Want to be sure I'm on mute? Okay, good. Good. I'll give this a shot before I hand it over to Beth and Patrick. I think your question is whether or not this is a true break from the past, considering all the challenges, equity and COVID and all the challenges.
Correct.
I would say that it is. I would say compared to the last 4 years, we're going to see something that's quite different. That's quite different from the measures and the approach that the last team used. And I've always said if something is a priority, there are 3 ways to know, especially in the public sector or even in an NGO, wherever the organization is. Something's a priority. There are 3 ways to know whether or not it's truly a priority. The actions you take, the policies you put in place, and what kind of resources you dedicate towards those policies. And so if you start off with just the actions, for example, from this new leadership team at the federal level, and when I say actions, I mean like things like appointments or messages, some of the things that you saw Patrick show and Beth mention as well. So the appointments, I mean, you can tell, first of all, just by the person that was appointed to lead transportation for the country, former mayor, understands issues on the ground, worked on issues related to, addressing issues, bike ped related issues, transit issues, and a team that's being built around him as well. Same thing, that these are people who've worked on safety issues and the like. So those appointments, those are key action steps that you take. I think another thing is just the messages that are coming out. The president talked very early on during the campaign about a possible Justice 40 program where 40% of funding that's going to be created potentially for climate budget will go to addressing issues of environmental justice across the country. That kind of dialogue shows you that again, there's a bit of a, not a bit, but quite a bit of a break from the rhetoric and the discussion from the past. And then from a policy standpoint that I mentioned, policies that the president's putting in place and the team alike is working on. A clear example is the Paris Accord, the Paris Agreement that the president rejoined last week, and what that stands for, and recognizing the role that we as a country play in climate issues. I think the United States is like 4.5% of the world's population, but we represent 15% of the GHG in the entire globe. So more than 3 times what our population is. We're number 2 in the world. So compared to the prior folks who said, yeah, we don't need to do anything with this, recognizing that we're right after China when it comes to pollution-related challenges in the world. And the president as well, along those lines, had an executive order. I'm not sure if people are familiar with this, but it talks about tackling the climate crisis. Is specifically what it says. Tackling the climate crisis is the heading or the title of it. But it goes into a lot of detail about what multiple departments, U.S. departments, the role that they will play, including departments that we expect, like EPA and energy, but also HUD and DOT, and saying, look, you got to take action and address issues related to climate as part of your decision-making process moving forward. And finally, from a resources standpoint, of those three things, you need, if you're seeing whether or not something's priorities are truly changing. From a resource standpoint, again, we got to figure out the reauthorization. We got to figure out funding for transportation. But the signals are already there that from a resource standpoint, things are going to change. The infra grants were announced last week. If you're not familiar with infra, not completely related to the bike ped and transit side of the world, more focused on infrastructure for freight. But nevertheless, if you look at the criteria that was laid out in infra, which is roughly $1 billion program that actually started during Beth's tenure at DOT. I think they changed it. The name of it, but it's roughly $1 billion program. But three of the criteria that are set out really focus on creating a more multimodal system, addressing climate, and addressing equity in a freight sort of based program. That's pretty rare to make such a dramatic shift in the language that was used in the prior administration's infra grants and build grants, same thing, that were rolled out. But I think part of the challenge that's going to happen from a resource standpoint, Patrick showed us some of this information in his slides, is programs like TAP really need a boost. It really needs some new investment. I think Patrick was being generous in saying, go to 1. Or being conservative, I would say, and saying go to $1.7 billion. I would say the program probably needs to be tripled, to be honest with you. It needs 3 times the investment that it currently has because of the demand, because of the need. When you look every year, the demand across the country, it's clearly there. So tripling the amount of money that we spend on walking, biking, and transit is absolutely needed at this moment. If you look at the National Household Travel Survey and look at the percentage of people who walk and bike for trips in this country, I think roughly right now it's probably about 12 or 13% of trips happen in that form. So if that's the case, and we're spending the TAP program, the TA program right now is like 2% of the transportation budget, whereas 12% of the trips happening are sort of active transportation related. It's clear we need to do something different there, and time will tell for this team if they can follow through on the resources related to those needs as well. Very good question.
Yeah, I'll just add, as someone who was part of the last administration, and I particularly think about with Secretary Fox's leadership, how much time and attention was given to what a lot of the highways have done to Black neighborhoods and other minority neighborhoods, particularly his own, where the highway created a big barrier for him and his family and his neighbors to get to the things that they needed in order to give some extra convenience to those that were trying to barrel through his community and people who looked very differently than the people who were being inconvenienced. I think we've done a decent job in bringing attention to these issues in the past, maybe not with the level of commitment or the open ears to it as that we have today. Where we fell short is we just did pilots. We supported programs to fix the damage, but not stopping the the big programs from causing the damage. We didn't make changes to the rules. We had interagency committees that talked about it but didn't enact any real change. I myself was one of the drivers of the Partnership for Sustainable Communities, but nothing from the Partnership for Sustainable Communities became part of the permanent programs. And that's unacceptable. And that's what I'm looking for from this administration. Right now, if all of the money spent from the federal highway program on projects in areas where people actually live were built properly, we'd have all of that money for bike and ped movements, every penny of it. And that's $45 to $50 billion a year. What we do in this country in the name of reform is we resurface a roadway and we design it wrong. And then we ask a tiny program to come back and retrofit it while we're continuing to build more wrong things. It's like using a bulldozer to dig a ditch and then having people refill it with a teaspoon. And that's what we need to change. And it's not easy. I'm not saying it because it's easy. I'm saying it because we have to hold the administration to the high level of effort that it's going to take to make this real. They are going to struggle to make the infra program about anything but highway expansion, because the way the program is written in the law makes it hard to do anything but highway expansion. And I look forward to seeing how they figure out a way to make a highway expansion program multimodal when it statutorily limits the money to highways. So I mean, these are big challenges that are going to be very hard to make. I will say, even in the rhetoric, there's a couple of things that we could push the new leaders to improve on. In Secretary Buttigieg's confirmation, when asked about climate, he talked about electrifying vehicles. He did not talk about allowing people to get out of vehicles. And so we could just help take that another step and point out that we really shouldn't be making changes for the climate that don't also improve equitable access to essentials and to jobs. Because frankly, we are perfectly capable of electrifying the system while fully embedding the inequities of the last 70 years even deeper into our future. Just trading one car for another car while maintaining the rest of the system that blocks people from getting around outside of a car, that's not a climate initiative. That's an unfortunate way forward. To their credit, everyone in this administration is reaching out and asking how to make sure they don't do it. So I think we've got open ears, but we have to keep pushing.
Let me just add, I think that the last year, the events of the last year are really bringing about a sea change in how we think about transportation. Because just as some examples, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments this last week, where in the area that's covers Washington D.C. and College Park, where I'm mayor, and that survey showed that people are starting to think very differently about transportation as a result of the pandemic. And that 60% of the population, the population surveyed, said that they will likely be telecommuting at least one day a week. The number of people who plan to be walking or biking to work at least one day a week will double. And of course, with the growing understanding of racial equity and justice, I think there's a increasing understanding, and that's not just from the past year. That's from and going back to Anthony Fox and as Beth talked about, his Ladders of Opportunity initiative and everything that he did with the Department of Transportation, this growing understanding of that transportation investment is a tool for equity and can be used in good ways to promote equity or to destroy and disrupt communities of color. So with that understanding, there's the opportunity here, but we, as both Beth and Tokes have said, I think we need to make sure that we're taking the information, the resources, the growing understanding that we have, and turning it into good policy.
Perfect, thank you, Patrick. And now that you mentioned that, I would like to ask you, do you think the administration has indicated how they'll prioritize active transportation equity needs? Like often the effect of bike ped infrastructure spending has been to like exacerbate inequality by focusing on white commuters instead of considering how BIPOC and poor communities use active transportation infrastructure differently. So what do you think about this? And this question comes from our attendees.
Well, I'll say I think what Tokes said about the infra grants, that's a good indication of where they're going to go, and I think that was the first opportunity that they had to show that they're going to be prioritizing equity. I think it's going to be carried out through everything else that they do as well. I mean, we need to keep an eye on it and make sure that they continue to prioritize that it's not just a flash in the pan, that the next the years to come that continues to be a thread throughout everything that they do. But I do think it's a good indication.
I'd definitely like to raise the complexity here, and that we have to understand that we are inheriting decades and decades, if not centuries, of structural racism. So it's not simple to address what BIPOC communities may need. The fact of the matter is, we've spent generations taking the ability to safely walk and bike around away from people, and at a time where there's an increasing demand for it. So now you've got supply held down while demand is increasing. That means if you build it, you have price pressures. And until you get equilibrium, those price pressures are going to exist. So we can't make a move today that doesn't trigger all the damage we've caused for decades upon decades. And if you are in one of these communities, you have concerns about that. So if we're going to listen and include the neighborhood, and they say, I'm not comfortable for these reasons that go back decades, and then we say, okay, well, we won't build here, but the neighborhoods that will take the projects are in white neighborhoods, then you're further exacerbating the problem. And it's not unwound with one step. It's going to be very challenging, and nobody is wrong in that scenario. It's right for the community that has seen underinvestment, fearing an investment that could cause price pressures that displace them. At the same time, we don't want to stop building bike ped infrastructure, and that distrust, which is fair to distrust the communities, distrust the government that has caused problems, is going to also cause problems that leave those that most need access behind. And unwinding this is going to take a multi-pronged and long-term effort.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And regarding that, what would you like to see in terms of the new administration advocating for decriminalizing walking and biking, and particularly addressing the disproportionate response of police in ticketing persons of color?
Well, that's a tough one. That's a big question. There's a lot to add there. You know, I think we appropriately have made the shift from talking about you know, the 4 E's of safety when it comes to active transportation and transportation in general, to two things. One, talking about safe systems, and two, talking about the enforcement component in a way that's equitable. So I no longer just say enforcement when I'm talking about this issue with our law enforcement counterparts in the state. We say equitable enforcement. Is the term we use, and we go through a process of explaining from our perspective what equitable enforcement means. It's not a part of our state highway safety plan, and also the safe systems approach, I think, is something important to keep in mind as part of that sort of decriminalization, as you call it, to understand that the issues that we're trying to address on safety are not always about the person that ultimately got hit. In this case, a lot of times the vulnerable user. That's where sort of our culture and the tradition of enforcement has always leaned. It's okay, yeah, the person on that bike that got hit, they did something wrong. And so helping not only us in the transportation community, the planning community, engineering community, but the law enforcement community to start talking about and understanding a true safe systems approach that recognizes that, I think some of the things that Beth laid out very well, that there are design issues that we have that impact very much safety. There are behavioral issues. So it's a full system of issues that we need to be looking at. Speed as a part of a system. So we need to be looking across the board and not just looking at the person that got hit and saying, yeah, they're at fault in some kind of criminal way. So, but that's my quick thoughts on that.
Isn't it nice to have a leader of a DOT say that? It's really makes me so happy. I remember being in Florida when they were updating their highway safety plan, their statewide highway safety plan, and talking about the 4 E's. But when my organization, we were leading a lot of these sessions, tried to raise the engineering E, they got very unhappy. They resisted it extraordinarily. There's a big push in a lot of states towards enforcement because it gets them out of engineering change. And we have to recognize that. At the same time, the police were showing up and saying, we don't want to be in this business at all. And interestingly, I believe it was a podcast called Throughline that talked about the origins of traffic enforcement. The police fought it tooth and nail. They wanted no part of it until Prohibition, when people were transporting alcohol by car and they wanted to stop cars to find bootleggers. But there was the reaction of the police at first was right. We shouldn't have any part of this. And what we should be looking for in transportation is making it really uncomfortable to drive in an unsafe way and make it really comfortable and natural to drive in a safe way. And that we have that completely reversed. We make it very comfortable to drive fast and whip around turns and things like that. And then we're just shocked that these crazy people are making these crazy decisions that we laid out the road to tell them to do. So I hope that we look towards more self-enforcing roads rather than police catching people for doing something that felt natural to do because the way we laid out the roads.
I'll just note that Rails to Trails Conservancy, working with the Transportation Equity Caucus and working with leaders on equity issues from around the country, like Abai Reed from Equiticity in Chicago, to really dig into these issues and develop ways that we can have stronger policy that really looks at Vision Zero and other safety initiatives and ideally removes enforcement or looks at enforcement in a different way that is more equitable and focuses on the way that we design things so that people aren't encouraged to do things in a way that aren't safe.
Thank you. And we have a few questions regarding rural communities. So how does the administration plan to ensure that a robust transportation system will actually connect rural communities to regional service, shopping hubs, and overall opportunities to thrive?
Well, Rails to Trails Concerns, I mean, trails are great in rural communities as well, and we have a lot of resources available about how trails have been helpful in rural communities, not just in many rural communities, not just as a way of transportation, but also as a way of bringing in recreational tourism dollars. So, but small towns trails can help build a main street area in a small town, can help connect between towns and rural areas. That's part of our active transportation connectivity grants, is to focus on rural areas as well as suburban and urban areas.
I will also just add that the rural-urban dichotomy is false. There are urban places and rural places where people live, and there are places where people don't live. And that's the split. The issues that rural towns face are really the same as in most urban neighborhoods. Very few urban neighborhoods are skyscraper-filled areas. In whole communities, they have none of those. My neighborhood in the middle of Washington, D.C. feels like a sizable rural town. When I lived in Ravenswood, West Virginia, which at its height of development was 5,000 people, and now it's back down to about 2,000 people. You could walk absolutely everywhere in that community, and a lot of the changes made since then clawed that back, just like in urban areas. So I would say a lot of what we have to do in urban areas, exactly what we need to do in rural, in terms of connecting people to what they need. We should not be making it more comfortable to go 100 miles to people's necessities. We should be seeking a way to bring their necessities closer to them. this notion that rural people just love driving long distances and spending incredible amounts of time getting to the hospital is a lie. It's what you say when you don't care about rural people having access to, a convenient healthcare. So I think we should be looking at broadband and subsidizing bringing more healthcare close to people rather than constantly seeking ways to make long distance travel more convenient.
Thank you. Okay, so for the sake of time, I have one last question coming from the public as well. So given all these changes, what advice would you give to local advocates under local advocacy efforts for promoting walking?
So, this is probably a better question, possibly for Patrick and Beth. But I'll say real quickly that a lot of advocates and nonprofits that work on this issue probably have been a little apathetic, about the recent years and how much of a struggle it's probably been on these issues. But I think it's time to re-engage. It's time to lock back in. If you're at the local level or whatever level you may be working in, time to absolutely lock back in. We've got a team of people that have been appointed to lead us in this country that very much understand the issues, but that doesn't mean we step back off as advocates or people working in the government space and say, oh yeah, they've got it. No, it's time to be fully engaged and continue to push for these issues on all corners. And I'll say just quickly that it's not just about the federal level, though. I think a lot of times that's where our attention goes to, and we say, oh yeah, the president or the secretary. No. I mean, you've got city government level mayors, county elected officials, state senators and reps that we need to be pushing for change at that level as well. But also working with, again, the federal level, your members of Congress to say, look, if there's a new authorization or reauthorization of the transportation bill, these things are critical to our community. And so I think it's time to lock back in and be fully engaged. Again, is what I would recommend.
I don't think I could have anything to add to that. I think that sums up pretty well. Stay engaged.
Yeah. Do what Tokes said.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Oh, Paulina, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you so much for the invitation, and we really enjoyed all of this information. And I was going to give it to you, Kelsey.
Thank you. I know a few people have to drop off, and thank you all for sticking with us through the hour as well. And thanks so much to you, Paulina, and all our panelists for sharing your insights and your expertise on this really important and hyper relevant topic, obviously. And thanks to everyone for being engaged. We received a lot of really great questions. So I think we'll just end and echo what Tokes said to open us up, that it's clearly not a time to relax on these issues, and that action is needed now, and it's time to hold leadership accountable for that action. So again, thanks to our panelists for giving us so many ideas, tools, and really an energized impetus for carrying this work forward in ourselves. So we want to thank our sponsors again for the webinar. And if you enjoyed today's discussion, please consider playing a part in keeping more content like this coming your way by making a donation. You'll see a link in the chat box. We suggest $15 to $20, but anything helps and really goes a long way towards extending and improving our work. I want to let you all know as well that our next webinar is called Storytelling for Advocates. That's happening Wednesday, March 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to discuss how we can all be reaching more people and convince people of the benefits of inclusive and accessible, walkable communities through storytelling. So we've put together a panel of really creative and experienced communicators to share their ideas about how we can cut through the noise and move people to action in that way. I also want to mention that America Walks is going to be accepting story submissions that speak to how the manual on uniform traffic control devices has been a barrier to you getting your people first work done. So if you have stories on that, we're going to release details in our newsletter this week, and we'd love to hear from you. So thank you again so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to spend this time with you. Keep a lookout for the survey email so you can tell us what you thought of this webinar. We really do value your feedback and input. And thank you again to all our guests for their precious time today. Have a really great day, and we'll see you next time.
Great job, Paulina and Kelsey. Great job.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank
Tokes.
you for having us. Thanks for your work.
Thanks so much.